Welcome to Syncfusion and Xamarin's webinar, What's New in Xamarin.Forms and Essential Studio for Xamarin. My name is Marisa Keller-Outen. I'm the Director of Business Development here at Syncfusion and your moderator for this webinar. Our presenter today is James Montemagno, Principal Program Manager for Xamarin at Microsoft. James is also Microsoft MVP with over a decade of experience in software development in a wide range of industries. Today, he will do a live demo showcasing what's new in Xamarin.Forms and Essential Studio for the Xamarin platform. And then he'll address audience questions in a Q&A portion at the end in the last 20 minutes. If you have a question for the presenter, please enter it into the questions box, and we'll try to answer as many as we can. If you have a problem with this broadcast, such as issues hearing the audio or seeing the slides, please enter your question in the questions box. Our support person will help you directly. This webinar will be recorded. The recording will be available after the webinar. We'll email a link to all registrants letting them know how to access that. A little bit about Syncfusion before we get started. For over a decade, Syncfusion has enabled enterprise developers by providing a broad range of web, mobile, and desktop controls, including over 650 components spanning 12 platforms. Syncfusion's Xamarin offering contains over 50 controls for Xamarin.Forms, Xamarin iOS, and Xamarin Android, and includes real-world Xamarin samples. And just for attendees, we have a special 50% off coupon code off of our Essential Studio for Xamarin. So check it out. It's webinar 0716. And now I'm going to go ahead and hand this over to James.
Perfect. Thank you, Marisa. Let's see if I can grab the controls from you. Perfect. Show my screen. Main monitor. I like that. Did it work? Did everyone see it?
Yeah.
Perfect. Awesome. Let me hop into the slideshow really quick right here. Perfect. Awesome. So I'm so excited to be back. If anyone was here and actually was on the very first webinar that we did with Syncfusion almost about a year ago, I would say, before all the dev days and all that stuff, which went fantastic, I was able to show off what Essential Studio could do for your Xamarin and Xamarin.Forms applications. And just a few easy steps, we were able to add some bar charts and graphs and pie charts really quick into our application that was already built out. So what I wanted to do today is talk about what's new, not only in Essential Studio for Xamarin from Syncfusion, but also what's new in Xamarin.Forms. What has changed over the last year or so since the last time I came onto the webinar? So a little bit about myself. Marisa did an amazing job introducing me. Thank you so much. I live here in this beautiful sunshiny city of Seattle, Washington, where it's surprisingly not raining today, but we'll be able to take a look at the forecast later during the demo, which is cool. And I've been here for about 5 years as a professional mobile developer. I moved here to take a job at a small startup, started working at Xamarin 3 years ago, and obviously now part of Microsoft, which I'm super excited about. But really I moved here, like I said, for a startup, but mostly because we have an amazing lineup of coffee shops here, and all I do is just guzzle coffee all the time. In fact, I have my big coffee. That was my biggest thing before I started the webinar. I was like, I got to get my coffee. Marisa knows. She's seen me in person just drinking lots and lots of coffee. Like I said, everything I do is all about making beautiful mobile applications. I've shipped and published over 70 apps over the last 5 years. The favorite part of my job is not only getting to talk to all the amazing developers and doing webinars such as this, but also that all of my projects and libraries and applications are open source on my GitHub. You can find me anytime at my blog, Mott's Codes, on Twitter, or my GitHub, which is just my name, James Montemagno, or you can feel free to email me at james@xamarin.com. And then I'll get redirected to my crazy long Microsoft email address. I also want to say that I also started a brand new podcast, so if you want to hear more from me and weekly mobile development, mergeconflict.fm is a new weekly podcast that I just started this week, so kind of first to hear about that. But of course, you're not here to hear about me. You want to hear about Syncfusion, Essential Studios. And what I want to do today is take a first look at what is Xamarin. Really quick 5-minute overview. What is Xamarin? The Xamarin platform. How do I get it? What has changed even in the Xamarin platform since the acquisition from Microsoft? But also, what is Xamarin.Forms? You're going to see some stuff, but I'll give you a little brief overview of what Xamarin.Forms is. And then we're going to write a little application really quick. Then what we're going to do is take a look at how we can extend Xamarin.Forms easily with Essential Studio. And what we're going to do is take that same application that we built and add some beautiful Essential Studio controls. So about 4 or 5 controls that we can easily add with just a few lines of XAML to really spice up the application and make it look real good and professional. And then I'm going to do a brief overview of everything that's brand new in Xamarin.Forms. What's some things that are out today that you can get a hold of? How can you improve your existing Xamarin.Forms application? And what's some new hot stuff that's on its way? And then, of course, we'll end with a little bit of Q&A. So when I think about Xamarin, and when I started 5 years ago, what I fell in love with Xamarin for was that I could completely take all of my C# and .NET skills and libraries that I knew and had crafted over the last decade of building professionally C# applications on the desktop and apply all that skills and knowledge and library knowledge to iOS, Android, and all of the Windows platforms, of course. And I could really create purely native applications across the different platforms. And that's what I really fell in love with, that my users, when they download it from the App Store, it's just another app from the App Store. There's no additional install, anything like that. It's just an app that you download and consume. And what we do is we enable you at Xamarin to take Xamarin and build a shared C# logic backend, all of your .NET code, so your models, view models, RESTful service calls, SQL databases, things that are the same across the different platforms. Then we give you the tools right inside of Visual Studio to build and craft a beautiful iOS user interface, Android user interface, and of course Windows user interface too. Sharing code across all the platforms, on average 70 to 80%, still with 100% native API access. Now what that looks like if you're a Windows developer is that you have this .NET runtime, .NET framework that's running somewhere on a Windows machine or on an ASP.NET server. Amazing .NET stuff, right? System link, XML, IO, numerics, core, things that we kind of know and love. And when you want to go to a new platform with Windows, you just download an SDK for maybe phone or for tablet, Windows 10, maybe it's for ASP.NET. You get some new SDKs to play around with. But in this ecosystem, it's always been tied to a Windows machine because that's where .NET has always lived. But think of it kind of exactly the same as going to another Windows platform, but it's iOS or Android with Xamarin, because you get all of that .NET goodness on the bottom there, and this is just a subset of everything that's available. But you get .NET all there running on Mono, which is the original open source implementation of .NET, so it's just .NET that we've created. It's open source, and you can run it on iOS, Android, Mac, and of course Windows or Linux or anywhere. We have a highly advanced linker and compiler that bundles all this up. But what we do is we give you 100% API access to every API in iOS and Android. So we create these C# bindings around every single API. So if you want to access UIKit or iBeacons, core graphics, core motion, or want to create an Apple Watch application or Apple TV application, we give you all of these bindings in C# and then add C# features like async await, lambdas, events, delegates, things that we kind of know and love. And of course, the same is true on Android. You get all of the Android stuff up top. You get all of the Google Play services, Android support libraries, everything in the Android ecosystem, but you're sharing that core base on the bottom. We have two amazing IDEs. I'm going to be doing all my demos today in Visual Studio 2015. Any version of Visual Studio, we support 2012, 2013, and 2015. All levels, so Community Edition all the way up to Enterprise. If you're on a PC, that's your go-to for Visual Studio. If you're in a Mac or maybe you're in a distributed team, we have Xamarin Studio, which is a phenomenal IDE as well. Same features, you can build all your iOS and Android applications in either IDE. The beautiful part here is that the same solutions and same projects open in both IDEs, so no matter where you're working, you have an IDE for you and there's no conflicts or anything like that. Beautiful part now is that the Xamarin platform is completely included at no additional cost into Visual Studio, any tier of Visual Studio, including the free edition of Visual Studio, the Community Edition. So that means if you're a small startup or independent developer, Visual Studio 2015 is completely for free for you, and Xamarin is completely for free. And there's no restrictions, so it's unlimited app size. You can ship to any app store. There's no profit sharing, no anything like that. You're truly building great native applications that get bundled up for iOS, Android, and Windows. You ship them to the App Store, and there's nothing to pay. It's beautiful. Of course, if you already have MSDN, Xamarin's included in your MSDN now at no additional cost. So there's no reason not to be building great apps with Xamarin. And to even take it a step further, everything that you're going to see, including Xamarin and Xamarin.Forms, is completely open source. You can take a look at all of this awesome stuff that we've been doing here today, and you can take a look at how we build Xamarin.Forms, how we build Xamarin iOS, how this all happens. You can learn about that at open.xamarin.com. So let's talk about Xamarin.Forms, because I've always lived in a world that I loved the ability to go in and craft a beautiful iOS storyboard file inside of Visual Studio or Android XML files and craft a very unique and different user interface for iOS and Android and Windows. and really take advantage of the different platforms. But we have tons of developers that have come to us over the years and said, a lot of my applications are doing the same similar things. They're going out, they're getting some data, they're doing some CRUD operations, putting it back in a database. Or you have things like a login screen and like a contact screen that they're very, very similar per platform. So I said what we really want is a beautiful cross-platform API to share even more code, but I don't want to lose that Xamarin magic, which is creating pure native user interfaces and native experiences. So I still want great performance, I want great user interface. And that's where Xamarin.Forms comes in. So if you take a look at the traditional approach, which is still available and I still love, because for certain applications you're really going to need to get down into and customize every little bit of it. But you get that shared C# backend logic and then build out the 3 different user interfaces and access those native APIs. If you add Xamarin.Forms into the mix, you just get this great shared UI code layer up top in that orange. And see that the shared C# logic is exactly the same. So you can go to and from. So you could start in one and go to the other, back and forth, and you can embed pages either way. Now the beautiful part here is that you still get 100% native API access. Because with Xamarin, we do not cross-compile or anything like that. We have an advanced compiler and optimizer for each platform. So you still go down, you can access all the iOS or Android APIs if you want to. So it can leverage and now share almost all the way up to 100% of code. So there's a lot packed in there out of the box before we even talk about the extensions with Syncfusion. So you get 40+ pages, layouts, controls, and you build all this in XAML, or you can do it in C#, code behind. I prefer XAML because I love things like two-way data binding, being able to access navigation and API and animation APIs directly. And we kind of give you this full MVVM or model view model approach. So you get a dependency service and a messaging center to do pub/sub messages across the wire. So you get all this stuff built right into Xamarin.Forms. So it's a lot more than just this UI abstraction. So of course, what we did out of the box is we give you some core layouts and pages to actually take advantage of. So up top, we're seeing the pages that you get out of the box when you install the NuGets from Xamarin.Forms. So you get a master detail, flyout navigation, a navigation page, so you get a tab on top. Tab navigation, we'll take a look at that today, and a carousel page so you can flip through pages, and of course a content page is just like, here's some content on a page. Then you get all sorts of layouts. So how do you want to lay out and stack your controls? So things like stack layout, stack horizontally or vertically. Relative layout would say like this button is below this label. My favorite is just a grid. There's a grid everywhere. So you can have rows and columns and put that inside of a scroll view and nest all this stuff together, and it's pretty great. So you can lay things down however you want. And then what Xamarin.Forms does, right, so you were describing these layout systems in XAML. What Xamarin.Forms does is you'll be putting these controls inside of that layout. Then Xamarin.Forms lays down the native control on each platform. So you say I have a stack, I stack 3 labels on top of each other. On iOS, it'll lay it on 3 UI labels and manage that for you because it's laying and controlling the native controls. And these are the controls here that we see are the abstractions that we've come up with. So images, labels, buttons, pickers, list views. We have about 40 pages and views and controls out of the box there. You can always get down to the native controls if you want to add and spice these up, which we'll take a look at in a bit. So if you're creating like a login page, what would that look like? Maybe I wanted to create some tab pages here. So I have a tab page. I'm going to put some pages inside of it. So we can see here if I just have a stack layout and 2 entries to have a username and password, there's that text property that has this like weird binding username syntax. And what that binding username syntax means is that there's a property in the code behind that is named username. So when I start typing my username, it'll automatically update the actual code behind for me because it has this two-way data binding. If I update in the code behind it, updates the user interface. Same thing with password. But we can see I have an is password set to true. Then we have a button underneath there that's called login. It has a green background with white text. It has this binding for a command to a login command. And just like the binding to username and password, the binding to login command essentially tells us that there's a method in the code behind called login command or an I command that I'm going to bind to that will get invoked when I click on that button. So I don't have to say button.click plus equals blah, blah, blah. I just go ahead and bind it to this login command. What we're seeing over there on the left-hand side is that we have iOS, Android, and Windows. And on the bottom on iOS, we have tabs on the bottom with icons with our proper user interface for login. On Android, we have material design with a material tabs with the actual material UI widgets. And on Windows 10, on Windows, if you're on Windows Phone, if you're on desktop, you get the Windows 10 look and feel for that application. We support all versions of iOS, so phones and tablets, and anywhere you can take an iOS application. Same thing on Android, phones, tablets, TV, it doesn't really matter, wherever you want to go. And on Windows, we support Windows Phone 8, 8.1, RT, Windows 10, Universal, so you can take your XamarinForms application, you can run on phone, tablet, Xbox, HoloLens, it doesn't matter, it's a Windows 10 application, it can be anywhere. So what I want to do now is, now that I've talked about what exactly Xamarin is, what XamarinForms is, what I want to do is take a quick look in the IDE, how do I get started, where are these XamarinForms controls coming from, and how do I actually build an application. So here's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to jump out of the PowerPoint really quick. And where's my mouse? There it is. Perfect. All right, so here's my desktop. It's beautiful. And the first thing I have up here is the Visual Studio Android emulators. These are built on Hyper-V because I'm actually on a Surface Book. So I can actually have a touch screen. I can do all this with my finger, which is really nice. And these are super powerful, super fast. So if you've ever struggled with Android emulators, these ship from Visual Studio, called the Visual Studio Android emulators. They're great. But what I'm going to do is just simply open up Visual Studio. And the application we're going to build really quick is a very enhanced version of a weather application. So it's an application that's going to go out, and if I actually go into my panel, it's going to use an API from openweathermap.org to go in and grab all the weather and a 5-day forecast and put it in a user interface for me. Before I even go there, like, where would I actually get started with XamarinForms? Like, how did I actually get to this here? I went to Xamarin.com, I hit the download button, and if I had Visual Studio installed, it would install Visual Studio extensions for Xamarin, and then everything would be installed. If I didn't, then it would have me install Visual Studio with Xamarin. So one-click install handles everything for you, installs the Android SDK, all the Xamarin tooling. So when you go to Tools, we can see that Xamarin and Android and iOS are right in here. So then if you really wanted to start creating a project, because I've already created one here, but you'd say File, New Project. And when you have Xamarin installed, you're going to see some new project templates. So here under Visual C#, you're going to see Android. So these are the traditional Xamarin applications, so Blank App, Android Wear App, OpenGL, Single View, Unit Test. For iOS, we have Apple Watch, extensions, universal apps, iPhone, iPad. Then you have cross-platform. And you'll most likely start with the blank application for XamarinForms. And you can share all of your code through portable class libraries or shared projects. Portable class libraries give you one assembly to put all of your code that can be shared across the different platforms. And this is what I've created here. So this is blank app XamarinForms. And then what that'll do is it'll create your iOS, Android, and Windows 10 application and shared code. So let me zoom in here because it's a little bit small inside of Visual Studio. Here we go. So here what we can see inside my weather application is that we have a portable class library, and this is where like all of my code lives. So we have models, services, views, view models here. And then we have a weather application, so for Android, iOS, and UWP. We can see here inside my references, I've installed a bunch of NuGet packages. So I have some plugins. I have JSON.NET to do JSON deserialization. I have the XamarinForms NuGets because XamarinForms ships as a NuGet package. If you don't know what NuGet is, it's like our online repository of different controls and widgets, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, actually. But here we just have an Android application, again, with a bunch of different NuGets installed. We can see all the Syncfusion stuff installed here. And then we just have our resources. So we still can add our images and icons and layouts and other things if we need to go down into the native functionality. And then, of course, here we have iOS. We have our iOS project with any storyboard splash screens that we may need. And again, all of our references. You could come over and add a reference into any of these and say, well, what do I need to add? I'll go into the assembly, and here's all of my system. So all of my .NET is available to me. So if I need to add SQLite or data services or compression or JSON or net or HTTP, it's there for me. So everything is available right over there. And of course, the same for Windows 10. So what we're going to do is we're going to be writing all of our code right here inside of our portable class library, so everything in our shared code. So what I want to show you first is we have this weather service here. And this weather service code is pretty big. So our weather service is able to go out, and it either passes the latitude and longitude or the city here. What it does is create a new HTTP client so it can go down and pull a string asynchronously for me. It calls this openweathermap.org API and passes those different variables. It grabs that JSON asynchronously, so it'll go off on a background task for me, handle it. It will not lock my user interface or anything like that. It'll come back, and then I'll deserialize the object with JSON.net. And that weather model here is this big class of all this weather objects that are coming from this Open Weather Map API. And you see I've added these different properties because I like max temperature instead of temp max, for instance, here. Or all, and is cloudiness %, for instance. And we can see all these different properties that are coming in. And we even have some custom ones here, so I'm parsing some dates and times and things like that. So this is really nice. And where I got that from is essentially I went and I took this this URL, and I just opened up a browser, and I typed it in, and then I went into the query, and I'm in here in Seattle. Let's say Seattle, Washington, and it gives me some JSON. So then I took that JSON, I went to JSON to C#.com, pasted it in there, and I said generate. And it generates all of my C# classes for me automatically. There's also a way of even pasting this into Visual Studio and generating it all automatically, but I like this nice visual view here, just in a browser at JSON to C#.com. All right, so I have my essential logic, this weather service that's going to go out, it's going to query for the weather. And the real win here is that I have this thing called a view model. Think of a view model as the code behind a screen. It's completely decoupled in MVVM, which is model view view model. It's a way of abstracting away our user interface and our business logic. So our business logic doesn't know anything about our user interface. It just has some properties that the user interface can subscribe to. So here what we do is we have a weather service, like we saw earlier, and then I have some getters and setters. So here I have a location, whatever I want to search for. I have a little Boolean to say, do I want to use use GPS? Do I want imperial or metric? And then what is the current temperature? What's the temp value? And what's the humidity and condition if it's cloudy or sunshiny outside? Then we have this thing called isBusy. So when I go off on the background, I'm going to actually go pull and say isBusy there. Then I have my forecast here, which is like a collection of weather. So I have like all these weathers that I'll be lining up. So these are just things in their public, so I can actually bind to them in the user interface. We'll take a look at that. The core of this here, though, is this weather command, so get weather command. So when I click get weather command, I click a button. It's going to call this method, and it's going to call execute get weather command. This is actually going to do the core of our logic. It's going to go out and see, like, do I need to use imperial or metric? And then here it'll say if I need to use GPS, I'm going to use this geolocator plugin. So again, I'm in my shared code. I'm not in iOS or Android, but we have these plugins that will go out and get the GPS location for the specific device. It'll handle all that business logic for me. So one line of code to get GPS right there, and it'll give me my latitude and longitude. Here, for instance, or I could pass in the city and say, here's the location. Oh, we can actually get rid of that. We don't need that. Here, I'm just for demo purposes, I'm putting in a little delay because it happens so fast so we can see the user interface. So you wouldn't do that in production. And then I go out and I get my forecast. And then I just go ahead and I set all those properties, so the temp value, the humidity, and the things that I want my user interface to actually show. So let's create that user interface. I'm going to go here and open up my weather view. And what we're going to see inside of here essentially is just a blank canvas for us to actually put down some controls on. All I've done here is I've created a stack layout with some padding and spacing. So padding is like, indent all the controls by a certain 10 amount, and then spacing in between my controls. So I can go in, I can start typing away, and I can say, okay, well, I would like to first put down an entry, and then the text here will be a binding to location. There we go. Then I'm going to put a button down, and I'm going to say text, get weather. There we go. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say command, and we'll do a binding to get weather command. There you go. And then I'll go ahead and I'll say, let's put down some labels. And we'll say the text here will be a binding to the temp. Make that one pretty big, so font size equals, let's say, 24. And then we'll do label text binding condition. There we go. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put down an activity indicator, kind of like a little progress spinner. And I'll say is visible. I'll do a binding here to is busy, and I'll do is running, I'll also do a binding here to isBusy. So kind of only show it and only run it if the isBusy is set. And we can see back here that when I started this method, I set isBusy to true. It's going to take some time to go out to the UI, and then when I come back, I'll say isBusy is false. So that's the first screen of my application. I've even created another screen to do the forecast. So I have this forecast view, and I've created this ahead of time, but I have a list view. I do some like nice little things like only on iOS, set the little spacer to transparent. And then in each cell, I display an icon, and then I put a display temperature and date. So I can every 3 hours see what the temperature is going to be. So cool, now what I can do is essentially I can go and I can run this on iOS or Android. And we can see where the startup is going to happen. So I have this app.ces. And we can see right here what I'm doing is I'm creating a tab page just in code behind, because you can if you want to. I'm going to say this is called My Weather, and then I have a weather view model. I have a weather view here, so I have the 2 different pages, so it'll be my tabs. Then I put that in a navigation page, so I have like a nice title bar on top, and I give it some colors. Now there's really no code to write on iOS or Android. Inside of Android, I can just go into my main activity and see that all it's really doing is doing some stuff for Syncfusion here, but it's just loading the application and loading that app. That's it. Same things on iOS and Android and UWP, nothing much there. So I'm just going to go ahead and start, and what we can see is that Visual Studio has already found all of my Android emulators that have been running here. So if I go here, we can actually see it's going to start deploying onto my Android emulator. So it's going to build it up just on my PC, and it's going to go ahead and deploy right here to my Android emulator. Perfect. So we can see here it's like for Seattle, it's going to go off. There's my little activity indicator, and it's 57.81 degrees. And then I can swipe over. I can, of course, scroll through, and we can see that it's actually not going to rain here for a while. It's going to be in the 70s and 60s. Pretty nice. We're going to get some sun here. And I can even pull to refresh there. But I could say, oh, what is it going to be in my hometown of Cleveland, Ohio? Probably hot and humid. No, that's not too bad. 76, but yeah. So not too bad in the 70s. Interesting. Cool. So we have like our actual weather that's going to be right here in Cleveland. The beautiful part here is that now I could come back and set the, let's say, Windows 10 application as the startup, and I'll start, here running this application. I've made no changes into the UWP or iOS or Android applications, but now it's going to start up here. It's going to launch my Windows 10 application just on my desktop, and I can see here we can see what it's going to be in Seattle. Say get weather. There we go, Seattle, 57. I click on the forecast. I get my forecast, which is pretty great. I can do the same thing now on iOS and set that as my startup. And we can see all of Android and Windows 10 can be done completely on a PC. It doesn't matter. You don't need anything else besides a PC. For iOS, I can do all my development and everything like that just here on a PC. But when I want to run it on an emulator or device, I actually have to be connected to a Mac somewhere. So we can see this little green status up here. And what our extension does is it goes and it talks and uses your Mac as a build host. So it'll sit there and it'll compile up your iOS application and find all your emulators. And what's really amazing is we just announced and just released our Windows emulator for iOS, which means that you can do all of your development right inside your Windows. And when I hit debug on this iPhone 5S, it'll go off, compile my C# locally, but then go over to my Mac, build up the application, and start an iPhone simulator right on my PC. Which is pretty much amazing. You never have to leave your PC. So here it is, boom, which is awesome. And since I'm on a touchscreen, I can use all my touchscreen features that I would want to, which is great. So I can just put this mouse off to the side. There we go. It's in full debugging mode. So you see all the symbols coming in. I can say get weather. I get my little activity indicator. I get Seattle, few clouds. I can go over to the forecast. And we can scroll through it, so it's super fast, super performant, because it's a full simulator running over here on Windows, which is amazing. So now iOS, Android, and Windows 10 all just right here that we can see. So it's the same application running on the different platforms, but it gets the same look and feel across all of them from the XAML, but you're still getting the Windows 10, iOS, and Android native UI because it's the native controls. So let's say we wanted to take this application and extend it and add a whole bunch of other awesome stuff to it, right? That's what we want to do. Because with Xamarin.Forms, you can easily extend Xamarin.Forms to add a whole bunch of awesome UI. And that's really where, oops, that was a placeholder, there we go. That's really where all of Syncfusion comes in with Essential Studio. It's packed full of functionality. There's so many controls that are available for not only Xamarin iOS, but Xamarin Android and XamarinForms, and all the Windows platforms with XamarinForms. You get all of your charts and graphs and data grids and all your visualization that you could even imagine. I'm going to walk through some of what's new inside of Syncfusion, Essential Studio for Xamarin. But you get all of this amazing stuff in one package. Everything is there. Not to mention that you also get what I think is really unique is full Excel, Word, and PDF manipulation and visualization across all these platforms. So if you're looking to do any of that work, which I'm not going to show today, but it's all packed into Essential Studio. So you get all this stuff. And they've added a lot of stuff too. They're always adding. They have multiple releases every single year, always keeping it up to date and adding not only new platforms but new features and new controls and widgets. And they listen to what developers want. You can see just a sample here. So let's take a look at what's new in Essential Studio. I think there's been some amazing chart enhancements. I'm a big chart and graph fan. And I think when you're doing a lot of visualization of data, it's really easy just to lay down like some bar charts and grids and give your users a nice visualization of data. And this is what I did in the previous webinar that you could go back and watch. But they've added some really new stuff. They've added a lot more customization to all the different charts and graphs and a lot of new technical indicators and this new thing called a step area series support, which is really cool. And you can see it on the top right. For data grid, the data grid is super, I mean, I cannot tell you how many developers have come up to me and asked me for a super powerful data grid. And essentially think of a data grid as like a really advanced Excel spreadsheet that you can do all of your data manipulation in because you have all this data coming from a database, you need to put it somewhere. So they've really added full support for unbound column support. You can have as many as you want, all crazy. You can have as much customization of the cell borders, and they expanded, and you can expand and collapse all these groups and do everything here across all the different platforms. Super powerful and super great. My favorite one that I'm actually going to be demoing here is actually the calendar, because just like data grid, calendar is something that's really unique to each platform, and developers want this, and they want it inside of their application. So really, when you think of putting a calendar, this is a very complex control. Not only are you doing things like grids and rows, and you have to worry about the start day and the end day, and is it a week view, is it a month view, is it a year view, and what happens when they swipe right, or left, and then what happens when we want to put events in there. The Syncfusion calendar has full support for all of this. So you can have a year view or a month view. Inside of there, it has selection support, multi-selection support. You can constrain dates, so if you only want to see just this month, you have full globalization support. It's crazy. There's so much packed into it, and like we're going to take a look at this. I'm going to put it into my application. I added the calendar control into this application in 2 minutes. I tweeted about it the other day for the webinar. I was just so excited, and it just boom, and it's amazing. Now, we talked about some of the built-in pages in XamarinForms, and one of ours is called the master detail page, and that actually has a full kind of navigation flyout control kind of for each of them, but it has a different look and feel on each platform. And a lot of developers have come and they've even asked us like, well, why is it different? We try to do a little bit things differently per platform, but the navigation drawer is really cool on the Essential Studio because it does it gives you more flexibility than the navigation or the master detail page. It allows you to do slide transitions in and out. You can go from left or from right or different angles that are coming into it. And it allows you to essentially to do something like, let's say you need a filter in your top right or a setting fly out to the right-hand side. You can easily add that and you get the same look and feel across the different platforms. So you can even embed this into a master detail page and get that different navigation drawer fly out that's not going to manipulate your main application. One of my favorite things is pull to refresh. If you follow me or my blog at all, you know I love pull to refresh. It's a little silly, but I think it's one of my favorite features that's like in any application is just pull to refresh. And I have tons of blogs on this. And mostly pull to refresh, you think about that inside of a list view or a collection view of data. You pull on that and you get some data. But let's say you're building this weather application, even one that you're seeing right here in the samples, is that there's no list view of data that you're pulling to refresh. This is a content panel that's interactive. So you can actually pull on that content panel, and you can have it move the content panel or not move the content panel, and then you get an event when the user has done that. So you can show and hide the little indicator there. So this is a really good way of adding a pull to refresh to any view. Take it even a little bit step further is we think about when I'm creating something maybe like an interactive like app store, I have a photo gallery and I want something to be highlighted. The rotator is a really cool control to rotate through images, so it supports images. And so you have images that are rotating through. And what's really nice about this control from Essential Studio is that it allows you to add dots or thumbnails to like little images that you can scroll through, and you can custom position them like on top or on bottom. But you can have it swipe, tap, or autoplay automatically. So you can say, hey, every 2 seconds, make sure that this goes to the next dot. And you can have it go left or right or any direction that you want it to go through, essentially, which is really cool. So you think about where else can I kind of take these controls and what else can I do? So if you're like, I want some nice gallery up top, the rotator is up there. When you think about data collections, there's also this thing called a data source. So what this data source is, it's a non-UI component. So they've gone through and they say, we have this data source of information that things can consume, and we're going to make it the Syncfusion kind of data source that allows our developers that are using this to easily manipulate data. So traditionally, you'd have to do a lot of link queries or a lot of different things to do grouping or sorting or filtering. And the data source just does it for you automatically. So if you want to filter, it'll automatically handle, and essentially just think of it as like methods that would be called on this data source to actually do the data manipulation for you. And finally, before I go into another demo of actually seeing how we can integrate Syncfusion Essential Studio into our app, the most craziest and awesome control, I think, is probably the calculator. It's just a whole calculate library, an engine that has 400 plus built-in functions, and you can slap down anything. It's culture sensitive. You can take a look at the sample. It's a full like calculator, everything that you can do. It's pretty much amazing. There's tons of functions to do just about everything. So what I wanted to do is show you how to not only get set up and start running Syncfusion Essential Studio, but I wanted to take the same exact weather application and transform it into the Essential Studio edition. So when you get started with Essential Studio, the first place to go, hands down, is to go to syncfusion.com/product/Xamarin. You can also find it from the top, and you can find Xamarin. There it is, mobile. It's the #1 thing. We're #1 for mobile, right there, Xamarin. When you tap on that, it's going to bring you to this great page here. It's going to tell you how to get your free trial to get started. It's going to tell you about the community license, about the flat fee, how to get started, what's included. Talk about how everything is reimagined for touch and the full MVVM support. And this is everything for iOS, Android, and Xamarin.Forms. So when you take a look at these controls, and here are just some of the most popular controls, such as data grids and charts in Excel, but you can see everything that's supported across here. And you can see like where new controls are being added, like iOS and Android just got Kanban support, which is really cool control. Then you can go down and see screenshots and demos, and you can see what's new. And this is the 2016 Series 2, and then help and resources. And this is really where you're going to get started. So you can download, get the free trial. When you download the free trial, you'll get this amazing, immense library with all these samples. There's like tons of samples of everything you can imagine. When you go into documentation, this really is going to walk you through. This is so helpful to walk you through every single control that's in there. So it'll tell you like how to get started. So how do you download and install? And we're going to take a look at how to add it through NuGet, but how to get started. But then maybe how to actually, what are all of the controls? So here's an overview. Here are the features. Here's the getting started for each of them. So here's the reference guide for this control. And what I love is that they've toggled here for C# or XAML. So you can just see like, do I want to add it in C#? Do I want to add it in XAML? Then it'll go through and it'll say like, here's how I do the different animation styles. And then they go through all the different properties. So here's the different animation, here's the XAML, here's the ball type, and I can say, for this activity indicator, I want the battery, I want the movie timer, I want the globe, I want these different controls in there. You can do that for any of the controls that are there. So there's the doc.io, there's the PDF, there's the Excel there, and then there's all the tree controls, everything that you can imagine. It's all in there. And all the release notes are down here too. So if you're like, oh, what's new in this version? Here's everything that's new. I mean, the release notes, the documentation, it's beautiful to take a look through, and it really helps you get up and running. So here's what I wanted to do for this application really quick, is I've gone in, and normally I go in and I manage all my NuGet packages. And when you say manage NuGet packages, we can see that the package source by default usually is just NuGet.org. So these are all the packages that I have installed here. So here's like JSON.net, and there's like a bunch of HTTP stuff, and we can see what I have installed. So here's everything that I have installed. So I have some different plugins installed to do location. I have some Android support libraries and Xamarin.Forms. Now what's really cool is that when you hit that little settings button, it's going to bring up this options to say where do you want the packages to come from. And if we take a look here, what I've done is I've added the actual NuGet.syncfusion.com/Xamarin. And And what this will do is it'll give me the hand-curated list of all the Syncfusion Xamarin packages that are available. So now if I go back into Browse, I can select all, but I can just say, oh, you know what? I just want to add Syncfusion controls. So here's every single Syncfusion control that's in here for Xamarin. You can scroll through and see every single package because it's pick and choose what you want. It's not one immense library. Each control is a little bit different. So if you say, hey, you know what I really want to add is I want to add the calendar. So I'll search for calendar, and there's a schedule, and there's the calendar here. And what you're going to find is that for each controller, there's going to be 3 packages. There's going to be the SF Calendar, sfcalendar.android, sfcalendar.iOS. And you can see what I've done is I've installed this SF Calendar for Xamarin.Forms. So essentially think of this core package as your Xamarin.Forms package, and I've installed it into each of them. So when you click on that, it'll install, and it'll ask you to sign like the EULA and the agreement that's there. It'll install all the packages that you need into all the packages here. If you're only creating an Android or only creating an iOS app, you would just add that single control. So here we can see that in my references, I have my Syncfusion busy indicator, calendar, and gauge. So I've added those in there. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to take that actual view that I created earlier, so kind of taking this, this weather view and transform this first. What could we add to it? So I've created a little Syncfusion folder down here, and the first thing I'm going to take a look at is the weather view. So I've added a few things in here. The first thing that we're going to see is that I've added a few XMLNS namespaces here. So I have things such as gauge and rotate and busy indicator and pool. So I've added these namespaces so I get access to those controls. We're going to see some of this stuff is very similar here. So I have the entries. I've added this use GPS switch in here. I have a button that says get weather. And then this is where things get a little bit different. I have a grid with some columns and rows. And the first thing that I do is I add a stack layout with our temp and condition, just like previous. The first thing I wanted to do is I wanted to show and highlight the humidity. So in this nice little 0 to 100, what is the humidity outside? And a nice little gauge, so linear gauge that's going up. So this gauge here is going to be vertical, and then here I set a custom background color for each platform. And then I have a scale. So inside of here is this scale that says go from 0 to 100, and put a little bar pointer that's going to be red, for instance, here, and bind it to the humidity. And then we have little ticks. So we can have a little tick, minor and major ticks to actually just go ahead and display those. So that's the first thing I want to do. The next thing I wanted to do is add a circular gauge. So I thought the circular gauge would be really cool. So if we actually come to the documentation here and look at the circular gauge here. So where's the gauge at? Gauge. It's here somewhere. Why can't I see it? There it is, circular gauge. Should probably just look, they're in alphabetical order, so that'd be good. Here's the circular gauge. So I wanted to do the current temperature outside instead of the speedometer, just the current temperature. So I have a little circular gauge here. And the circular gauge, I just give it a specific type if I want it to be facing the default direction or east or west or whatever direction I want it to face. I give it some like nice little angles, like where I want it to start and what size I want it to be. But what I need to do is just create a needle, and essentially the needle will say, hey, this is the temperature outside, this is where you need to go. And I just set a few other thickness, like how thick do I want the actual ticks to be on all of them. So not a lot of XAML that's in here, and that's it. And then on the bottom, I do an overlay. And the overlay, instead of just having that little spinner, I created this SF busy indicator here. Boom, that's it. And I'm going to use that little movie timer because I think it looks really cool, and I give it some red text called loading. And that's it. So I just have those up there. But then I wanted to create a brand new complete page. And I wanted to maybe plot the entire forecast on a calendar because I thought a list view was great, but a calendar would be better. And this is all the XAML for the calendar. This is it. This is the full calendar control inside my application. I go in and I use the cal here. So this is the Xamarin.Forms calendar. So I point it to the calendar, NuGet. And then I simply say single selection. I use a month view. And I want to show inline events. So I not only just want a calendar, but I want to show inline events. And you know what? Bind that to this thing called cal events. And we can see in my code behind here, there's nothing here. It just looks and it has its binding context. So what does this cal events do? Well, this cal events lives back in my view model. Remember that these are all the things that I'm binding to, such as my temp and my humidity. And what we can see here is we have this thing called update calendar. So whenever I go out and I get the weather, I essentially take all the forecast items and I convert them with this link query to a new calendar inline event. So I parse all the dates and times, and I add this thing called this calendar event collection. So I just fill it up every single time. So check this out. So now I can come into my app and I can say, you know what? We're going to use the Syncfusion version of these, and we're going to add a new weather calendar. That's what I've named it right over here, my weather calendar.xaml. So now what I can do is I can just simply start running it again on iOS, and this will go ahead and compile up the changes. So all I've done is I've changed the name of the weather views to use my Syncfusion version and my weather calendar. So I've added those NuGets. There's nothing else really I have to do. I just filed a little bit of documentation. Now it's going to build up my application and then redeploy it here on my iOS simulator. And then we'll take a look at it on Android and on Windows 10. So there we go. Now we're in debug mode. Boom, there it launches. There we go. Now we have our linear gauge and our normal circular gauge. And I can say get weather, and I get this nice little movie indicator. I kind of gray out the background here. It'll go out, and I can see what my current humidity is in Seattle, pretty low, and it's about 60 degrees. I can still go to my forecast because I have it here, or I can take a look at the calendar. I have this full calendar chart and graph. Actually, I can actually swipe through with my finger if I wanted to. I can tap on one, and I get all of the different, right here, I can get all the different temperatures throughout the day that are in here. And I didn't do anywhere. I just added these into my calendar, and I can get a selection of what my current date is right here. It's like pretty much amazing. So that's just iOS. So I get my iOS look and feel. It's perfect. I can use GPS, which would actually default here to, let's see, Cupertino, I think. There we go. I'm going to do the same thing. I'd get my location. I load it up again. I'm not only getting my location, but now I'm getting Cupertino's look and feel. And it's a little bit more humid right there and a little bit hotter. And to get all the animation in there too, it's maybe a little bit hard to see in the webinar, but it's all right there. We can load this up really quick one more time right here on Windows 10 and on Android. So we'll take a look and see what this application looks like now on the different platforms. So let's see, here's Windows 10. There we go. I can say get weather. It goes off, has a little bit different look and feel there, but now I have it all the way up to 60 degrees. I can get my calendar view here. And now I get my calendar. I can click and get all my inline events. Probably don't want to choose yellow for that color, but it's okay. I can modify that in my code. And then I can go and I can actually scroll through all the different things in my calendar and get back to where I want, just on a click wheel here. And of course, one more time over on Android, I can set that as my startup project. I can go ahead and start again without debugging really quick. And so close down the current application, and then of course launch it on Android. So it's like I'm adding these controls with just a little bit of XAML, a few NuGet packages from Essential Studio, and I'm kind of really enhancing and putting that production level on this application. So let's see here. And the nice thing, even with the different controls and graphs, like in calendars, it's to each platform. So here, for instance, I go out and I can see the loading, and we can see this is Cleveland, so it's a little bit hotter, so it's nearly 60 degrees and very humid in Cleveland. Then I can go over to my calendar, and of course here we actually have the Android calendar look and feel that those users would expect on their calendar. So you're still getting those looks and feels of all of them, which is pretty awesome. And I've color-coded these, so I say when it's really cold, make it blue, and then when it's really hot, make it red. And for us here in Seattle, anything over 80 is really hot. Cool. So I want to take a few minutes before we go into Q&A, now that we've taken a look at how to integrate Syncfusion Essential Studio and saw the MyWeather application, is what's new in Xamarin.Forms. Let's take a few minutes just to go over everything that's new, because I actually showed a lot here. Xamarin.Forms is a 2.0 release, and it's all the way up to 2.3, which is the very major releases that have occurred. So those are our big point releases that occur all the time. There's new previews all the time, too. We've added tons of support, not only for Windows 10, which you saw here today, but great design support, performance enhancements, and just tons. I can't even go over it. It would take me hours. The first thing to really go over is that Xamarin.Forms is open source. So you can take a look, you can contribute, you can see what we're doing, you can fork it, you can do whatever you want. We talk about performance, there's a few things. We've really enhanced the list view caching for all of your items. First thing I want to mention here is that you can set the caching strategy to recycle. This will automatically handle recycling of each of your cells in your current list view. So you just have to add that one property and boom, it completely optimizes your application. Huge scrolling performance. So if a lot of your cells are the same look and feel with very minimal data binding, just add that. It's going to completely change this performance of your app. And with performance comes this thing called XAML compilation. So what we've done is previously we would parse and inflate your XAML at runtime. Now what we're doing with XAML compilation is that we're actually parsing and turning your XAML into IL at compile time, which gives you errors if you mistype something, but also makes your app a little bit smaller, and it improves performance at the same time. So take a look at that. It's just one line. So faster loading, smaller app size, and everything like that. It's really cool. It's just one line of C# to add into your app. Design and controls, we've done some really cool things. We've added material design app compat. This takes 2 minutes to set up into your application. Huge performance gains, but also makes your app look beautiful with material design across all of the different platforms on Android. So you get a very similar look and feel, but a huge performance gain, but also just beautiful material design. We've added something called data templates to the list view. So for instance, you have different types of cells, like if you have a monkey and a cat and and then you can have different type of cells, and you say, if it's a monkey, use the monkey cell. If it's a cat, use the cat cell. If it's a dog, use the dog cell. Or in this instance here, the monkey chat, you have sender and receiver. So it's a really easy way of highly optimizing your list views. And finally, talk about a little bit of spice, is we've added these things called effects. So we had this ability to create a custom renderer, which is kind of exactly what Syncfusion does to create these beautiful controls. Those are for really full controls when you're doing custom controls, but a lot of our developers just want to get down and access 1 or 2 different properties, and that's where effects come in. They're very simple. You have an on-attach and on-detach. And you simply say, on-attach, let me modify the control, and on-detach, I can unmodify it if I want to. And that's it. And then simply in your code behind of your page, you'd say, resolve this effect, or in your XAML too. That's it. You can get down and access any of the properties. At Xamarin Evolve, we announced awesome, amazing things, not only our iOS simulator for Windows, we also announced a XAML previewer. It's in preview today. It's a previewer that's in preview. It's available in Xamarin Studio on the Mac currently, coming soon, or I wouldn't say soon, it's coming in the future. There we go, that's better terminology. Coming in the future. It was already demoed for Visual Studio, but coming in the future to allow you to actually type your XAML and see it update live over on the right-hand side as a previewer. So you actually see all the custom controls too. We handle deep linking into your application in Xamarin.Forms extremely elegantly with a way of register linkings and handling links. So if you need to connect your website or you need a custom URL navigation, for the Evolve conference application, you could go to the website, tap on a session, and it would open inside the application automatically for you. Really easy API. And then we added these things called data pages and themes. So data pages are a way to easily connect to JSON from the internet or to an Azure backend with just a few lines of code. And themes allow you to easily style your application in a light theme or dark theme with card views with just a few highly customizable controls. And you can find all about that on our developer portal. There's some amazing resources to find out all of this. There's some amazing ebooks, not only for Xamarin. We have a book by Charles Petzold, but the Succinctly ebook series from Syncfusion is phenomenal. You can go to their tech portal and actually grab the Xamarin.Forms Succinctly by Derek Jensen, which is a phenomenal book. And this application is completely open source that you saw here with all the Syncfusion stuff. If you actually go to my GitHub page, it's github.com/James Montemagno. When you click on the repositories, you'll see up top, at least for right now, you'll see the My Weather application. So I just updated it really quick. If you want to get to the Syncfusion stuff, you can just actually click on this branch, and I have a Syncfusion branch in here, and that's where you're going to see all the Syncfusion stuff that I did today. So you can grab that, download the source code, you can literally just zip it up, and you'll get access to all the source code that's there. So with that, I want to thank everyone, but I also want to hand it back over to Marisa, and I think we're going to go into a little Q&A. I know it went a little bit long, but I think we have a few minutes maybe.
Yeah, thanks, James, for presenting. We really appreciate it. Before we go into the Q&A, I just wanted to go ahead and show that coupon code one more time. So thanks again for attending. The coupon code for attendees is webinar 0716, so that will be 50% off the Essential Studio for Xamarin. So now we'll take some questions from the audience for our Q&A portion. Let me go ahead and see the first question. What OS versions does Xamarin support on iOS and Android? Parentheses, iPhones, watches, tablets, etc.
Yeah, it's a great question. So we support everything, to be honest with you. So when it comes to iOS, we have full support for all the OSs. I mean, obviously, when new versions of iOS come out, we've been shipping same-day support for iOS since iOS 5. So all the new features are there. We usually take a few weeks to get a preview available. So like when iOS 10, that should be coming soon. We already have an Android N version that's coming out. But we support all form factors. So we support Apple Watch, Android Wear, Apple TV, Android TV. You can go to all the Amazon Fire devices. So if you want to support Fire TV or the Fire tablets, we have SDKs available for that. You can literally go anywhere. And of course, it's just C#.NET code, so you can also target every single Windows platform that's there available. And the same thing's true for the Essential Studio. So they support, you saw here, I supported iOS, Android, and Windows 10. You can actually run that application on anything.
Great. The next question we have is, can an Xcode storyboard file be imported into Xamarin.Forms?
Great question. Yeah, so absolutely. The first thing that I kind of showed was that Xamarin applications, even if it's a Xamarin.Forms application, is still purely 100% native. So this means if you're using a storyboard today, which is kind of how iOS applications are laid out, or Android XML files, you can completely import existing storyboard files. It's the same format. It's a native application. And in fact, if you were using with Syncfusion and Essential Studio, if you're doing iOS or Android, you could take those custom controls, put it in our storyboard. We render live custom controls. You can then take that storyboard, and obviously it's in your Xamarin application, so you can add and you can open those up inside of Visual Studio. You just double tap on the storyboard, and boom, it opens up. You can import those.
Okay, the next question I have here is there a separate IDE for Xamarin?
Well, so there's on the PC you have Visual Studio, which I demoed today. It's a IDE from Microsoft. I believe it's the best IDE ever created. I've been using it for over 12 years now. It's amazing, and the Community Edition is completely free. You go to visualstudio.com. Now, if you're on a Mac, Visual Studio is only on a PC. So on a Mac, you use Xamarin Studio, which is our IDE, which is also open source and pretty much amazing. But the same project, same solutions open in either one. So you can take this My Weather app, open it on a Mac, or open it on a PC. So use Visual Studio on a PC, Xamarin Studio on a Mac.
Let's say the next question. Will the code samples from this presentation be available for download? Looks like you answered this already, though.
Yeah, and I think we'll probably, if you send out this, we'll make sure that that's linked in the notes.
Okay. Let's see. Why do your XAML page names all end with the letter C?
That's a good question. So what I did is, for when I was building this application, I was actually showing two demos at the same time. I wanted to show you the first core Xamarin stuff, and then Xamarin.Forms, and then the Syncfusion stuff. So what I did is I just renamed the weather view to weather view C. I don't know, I just added C. I don't know. There was no reason for it. It just looked like a good letter. But you can name them whatever you want. It's whatever you want. A lot of developers like to put they end their actual pages in page. So you have weather page, forecast page. I like to go with view because I think it just matches the name. But you can name whatever you want. Nothing specific. I just renamed it.
Cool. Next question. Where can the Windows emulator for iOS be downloaded?
Oh, great question. So simply go to developer.xamarin.com. You can't see my screen, but when you go to developer.xamarin.com, just type in iOS Windows, and then it'll show you. And it works with Visual Studio. I think you need 2015 for it to work, and it's just an additional install, and then you just turn it on. But we have documentation on how to do it, so just literally Google or just go to our developer portal and type in iOS Simulator Windows Xamarin, and you'll find it. Okay.
Does the iOS simulation require a Mac?
Yeah, so when you're doing any iOS development, you can write all of your code on a PC, but when you want to actually open a storyboard file for doing design, or you want to run it on an iOS simulator, even our simulator for Windows, I can't tell you how the magic of how it works, but there's some magic going on there. You want to actually package up your application, you need to be connected to a Mac. That Mac is a build host. These are restrictions put in place. They're Apple EULAs. They're terms and agreements that you sign that iOS applications have to be built on a Mac. It's Apple's enforcement for their developer policy, but it's also the fact that that's where all of the tools and the compilers live for iOS and the simulators themselves. So you have to have a Mac somewhere on your network, or there's other services like Mac Stadium or Mac in Cloud where you can rent a Mac for a set amount of time. And it doesn't have to be super powerful. It could be a Mac Mini, which is a few $100s for your development. So if you think like, oh no, I gotta buy a Mac and it's thousands of dollars, no, it's not true. You can buy a Mac Mini for a few $100, even an older one, and use it. It just sits there. It doesn't have to be super powerful. So you just have to have that. And then it just points at an IP address. So it just finds the IP on the network or wherever an IP is on the internet.
Great. How does the Syncfusion rotator compare to the pre-release Xamarin carousel view?
That's a great question. So we actually have a carousel view. They're a little bit different, I would say. The carousel view and rotator are very similar controls, which is that you're flipping through pages of controls that are highly embeddable. The Syncfusion one is optimized for images, so essentially flipping through pages of images. And then what it handles for you automatically, which is very nice, are those little indicators. So if you have an indicator of, like, let's say you have 10 different images you want to flip through, it'll add those indicators. It also has advanced support for thumbnails, so it'll actually do a thumbnail of your image automatically that you can flip through. The carousel view on Xamarin.Forms, which is another NuGet that Xamarin released, allows you to embed anything, so not just images, but anything else into it and flip through it. But it does not handle things like, it doesn't do the auto rotation, it doesn't do left or right, it only does one way. It doesn't do the indicator lights for you. So it depends on what your scenario is. And of course, you could trigger that automatically, but the Syncfusion one just kind of does a lot for you out of the box.
Great, we just have a few more questions. The next one I have is, instead of using JSON, I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly, I've used the WCF service, my cross-platform app with basic HTTP binding. It worked all right on an Android emulator, but I haven't tested it on an actual Android or iOS device. What kind of performance, security, or other differences should I expect if I use this architecture?
Well, that's a very intense question. Well, so for this, I would say definitely follow up with me. You can email me, james@xamarin.com, for questions like that. I've used WCF in the past, so it totally works. We have a WCF library for iOS and Android, so it totally works, except for, I use JSON because it's very lightweight. XML is a little bit lighter, is not as lightweight as JSON. WCF is a little bit more heftier of a protocol. But it still totally works. I used it 5 years ago and on iOS and Android, and it totally worked great. And we sold lots and lots of copies of our app when I worked as an independent developer. So.
Okay. Great, thank you, James. Looks like I've got a question here for Chad. Chad, could you please explain the community license?
Sure. And our community license is actually a free license, so you can log in and you can claim it. You will have to have we expect that you're a developer with less than $1 million in revenue. You could be a small company, you could just be a hobbyist, and if you're a small company, you'll have less than 6 developers, so 5 or fewer developers. And the community license is free. Go download it, and we hope that you'll take this, start playing around with it, do different things, provide feedback to us. We'll do full support. Any questions you have, our support team will come along, give you samples, fix anything you happen to find, and we just want everybody to come use our controls.
Great, thanks, Chad. We have just a few more minutes left in the Q&A portion, so we've got one more question here right now. In Android, you can send, receive, and process text messages, or SMS, but on Windows Phone and iPhones, you require special permissions from Microsoft or Apple. Does Xamarin provide access to SMS functionality on the iPhone and Windows Phone?
Well, so essentially with Xamarin, anything that you could do in Objective-C, Swift, or Java, you can do it inside of C# with Xamarin, because we have 100% API access. So if you're creating an application, like on Android, there's certain permissions that you have to ask just inside of your application to receive and send SMS. For iOS and Windows, those are more restrictive platforms, just by Apple and Microsoft themselves. So you would still go through the same channels if you were creating those types of applications. So as long as you can get that authority, and all those APIs are available to you, but you have to essentially go through the same channels. I've not personally done that, though I haven't created an SMS application on those platforms. But like I said, literally all the APIs are there, so anything that you can do, you're not restricted by anything. So if you could do it in the native language, you can do it in Xamarin and still create that beautiful native application.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for answering all the questions, James and Chad. I think we need to wrap up this session. We really appreciate everybody attending today. So thank you, James, for presenting as well. Thank you, Chad, for your help. And before we end the webinar, is there anything else you'd like to cover quickly?
I just want to thank everyone and thank you at Syncfusion for having me on one more time. And yeah, if anyone has any questions, let me know. But thank you guys so much.
Yeah, and if you'd like further information, please feel free to check out XamarinForms at Xamarin.com/download. And for a free 30-day trial of Syncfusion's offering for Xamarin, go to Syncfusion.com/product/Xamarin. If you have any questions about this webinar, please feel free to email businessdevelopment@syncfusion.com, and be sure to check your inbox the next week for a follow-up email with a link to the recording as well as the coupon code. Thanks again for attending. We really appreciate your time and hope you enjoyed it.